The first thing I learned about this world was that it worshipped monsters and called them heroes, and I learned that as I lay buried beneath the collapsed overpass outside Cleveland, my systems rebooting slowly, painfully, while the air above me vibrated with cheering crowds and the distant echo of explosions framed not as war, but as entertainment. And I remember thinking, with a clarity that felt like grief, that I had not crossed universes to escape war at all, only to find a civilization that had turned it into a spectacle. I am Optimus Prime, last acting Prime of the Autobots, and when I arrived here it was not in fire or glory, but in silence, my body torn through the veil between realities by a distortion. I still cannot fully comprehend my memories fragmented between Cybertron's death and Earth's endless failures. And as my optics flickered back online, I saw screens mounted to buildings, smiling faces in costumes, capes fluttering like national flags, and people chanting names with the same reverence once reserved for gods. And my processors flagged something deeply wrong, because these humans were not afraid of power, they adored it. I rose slowly from the rubble, every servo groaning, every movement cautious, because the laws of this universe felt subtly hostile, like gravity itself resented my presence. And as I stood there in my damaged truck form, blending instinctively into their infrastructure, I listened and I learned. And what I learned chilled me more than any battlefield ever had. This world had protectors who protected nothing, guardians who answered only to contracts and cameras, and champions whose morality was as artificial as their smiles. A sonic boom tore across the sky then, and instinctively, my targeting systems activated only to hesitate as a figure streaked overhead, wrapped in patriotic colors, trailing contrails like a missile, and the humans below screamed in delight, not terror, and I felt something ancient and heavy settle in my spark, because power without restraint is not heroism, it is tyranny wearing a mask. Over the next several hours I moved unseen, staying low, interfacing quietly with networks absorbing data at speeds no human mind could follow, learning names like Vought 7, Compound V, learning that these soups were not chosen by destiny or forged by sacrifice, but manufactured, commodified, owned, and every file I accessed read less like a defense initiative and more like a confession of planetary guilt. And I began to understand that this Earth had not lost its way by accident, it had sold it. When night fell, neon lights replaced sunlight, and the city glowed like a wound that refused to heal. I finally transformed, metal unfolding into my true form. Towering but restrained, optics dimmed, every instinct screaming that I was an anomaly in a system built on control. And in the reflection of a glass building, I saw myself as they would see me if discovered, not a savior, not even a threat, but an asset to be claimed or destroyed. That was when I felt it, a presence moving toward me with casual dominance, a sonic pressure that bent the air, and before I could fully conceal myself, he landed across the street with a crack that shattered windows, smiling as if the damage was incidental, as if destruction was simply a byproduct of his importance. And he looked up at me, not with curiosity but with ownership, eyes glowing, faintly scanning, judging, and I understood instantly that this was the apex predator of this world, not because he was the strongest, but because he believed himself untouchable. "Well," he said, voice amplified for no reason other than ego, "you're not in the brochure," and the humans nearby laughed nervously, phones already raised. And in that moment, standing beneath corporate gods and cheering crowds, I realized the true horror of this universe was not its violence, but its apathy. Because no one here was waiting for a hero, they were waiting for content. And as Homelander hovered closer, testing boundaries like a child with a loaded weapon, my hand tightened around my ion blaster, not in anger, but in sorrow, because I had sworn to protect humanity, and this humanity did not yet understand how deeply it needed saving, even from those it loved the most. He circled me slowly, boots never touching the ground, drifting like a thought that refused to leave my mind. And I held my position, not because I feared him, but because I had learned long ago that the most dangerous beings mistake restraint for weakness. And I could feel the city watching us, lenses pointed upward, every breath of wind carrying whispers of anticipation, as if they sensed this was not a fight but an audition. And Homelander smiled wider the longer I said nothing, his confidence feeding on silence, his eyes flickering with curiosity and irritation in equal measure. And when he spoke again, his voice dropped low, intimate, meant only for me, asking who owned me, who sent me, what logo I carried beneath my paint. And when I answered truthfully that I was owned by no one, that I answered only to the principle that freedom is the right of all sentient beings, his smile faltered just enough for me to see the fracture beneath it, the hollow place where something like belief should have been. He laughed then, loud and theatrical, turning slightly so the cameras could see his face, and dismissed my words as bad PR dialogue. The kind of thing focus groups would rewrite, and I realized with a tightening in my spark that he was not listening to me at all. He was listening to the crowd, to the imaginary audience in his mind that never stopped applauding. And when a police helicopter drifted too close and he crushed it mid-air with a casual squeeze, letting the wreckage fall like confetti, the crowd gasped and then cheered, and something inside me recoiled, because I had seen tyrants before, warlords and kings and false gods, but never one so openly adored for his cruelty. I moved then, stepping forward just enough to catch the falling debris before it struck the street, shielding civilians without announcement or spectacle. And the weight of the wreckage bent my joints but did not break them, and the silence that followed was sharper than any weapon, because for a brief moment the cheering stopped, replaced by confusion, by the uncomfortable sight of someone using power without demanding applause, and I felt Homelander's gaze sharpen, predatory now, his voice tightening as he asked if I was trying to make him look bad. I told him no, that I was trying to keep people alive, and the words tasted old and tired even as I spoke them, because I had said them on 1,000 battlefields to 1,000 enemies who never understood them. He descended closer then, close enough that I could see the imperfections in his smile, the tension in his jaw, the barely restrained rage beneath layers of branding, and he warned me, softly, that this was his world, that heroes here followed rules written in boardrooms, not ideals carved into dying planets. And as he spoke, I accessed more data, fragments of his history bleeding through classified files, glimpses of a child raised without love, shaped into a weapon, taught that admiration was the same as worth, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something dangerously close to pity. That was my mistake. He struck without warning, a blur of motion and sound slamming into my chest with enough force to drive me through 3 buildings, concrete and steel folding around us as screams echoed through the night, and as we came to rest in the ruins, dust settling like ash, I felt the familiar hum of combat protocols awaken, ancient and precise, but layered now with something heavier, something like mourning, because this fight was not about survival or conquest, it was about a world that had forgotten the difference between strength and goodness. And as I rose from the rubble, optics blazing brighter, I understood that if I fell here, this earth would not just lose a defender, it would never even know what a real hero looked like. The fight did not feel like war so much as a tantrum given flesh and momentum, and as Homelander tore through the ruins toward me again, I could sense his frustration growing with every second I remained standing, because he was not accustomed to resistance, not truly, only to opposition that eventually broke or begged or died off camera. And I met his next charge head-on, anchoring my feet into the street and absorbing the impact with a shockwave that rippled outward, shattering storefronts and rattling bones, and for a heartbeat we were locked together, my servos screaming under strain, his grin trembling as he realized I was not yielding, and in that moment our eyes met and I saw it clearly. The terror buried beneath his arrogance, the fear of being seen as ordinary, as weak, as replaceable, and it struck me then that he was not protecting this world at all. He was defending a fragile lie about himself. He tore free with a roar and unleashed his heat vision, twin lances of incandescent fury that carved through the night, and I raised my arm in time, energy shields flaring as the beams bit into my armor, melting paint, warping alloy, and I remembered Cybertron's last days, remembered cities burning under similar light, remembered promising the survivors that there would always be someone to stand between them and annihilation, and the memory hardened my resolve as I pushed forward through the beam, step by grinding step, until his eyes widened and the beam faltered, disbelief cracking his expression as I closed the distance and struck him not with my weapon, but with my open hand, a blow meant to stop rather than kill, sending him skidding across the street and through a Vought-branded monument in a rain of sparks and marble. The crowd had scattered now, cheers replaced by sirens and screams, and hovering drones buzzed overhead, broadcasting every angle, every crack in the illusion, and I realized that even if I won here, this battle was already being edited, reframed, weaponized against truth, because this world did not want justice, it wanted a narrative that kept it comfortable. Homelander rose again, slower this time, blood at the corner of his mouth, eyes blazing with something feral, and he screamed that I didn't belong here, that I was ruining everything, and when he charged again it was with lethal intent. No restraint left, and I made my choice, diverting power to my ion blaster not to destroy him, but to pin him, to end the fight without becoming what this world already worshipped, and the blast struck him mid-air, slamming him into the ground and holding him there, energy humming like a storm contained, and for a long, fragile second, the city was silent. I stood over him then, towering and scarred, armor scorched, optics dimmed to a steady glow, and I spoke not to the cameras, not to the corporations, but to the people hiding in the shadows, telling them that power without accountability is not protection, that heroes who demand love are not heroes at all. And as I spoke, I knew some would listen, and many would not, but truth has never required unanimous approval. Sirens grew louder, military signals spiked, and I sensed heavier forces moving in, plans within plans unfolding. And as I released the energy holding Homelander down and stepped back into the darkness, choosing withdrawal over domination, I understood the true scope of my task here. I was not here to defeat a single false god, but to remind an entire world that heroism is not about who watches you, it is about who you choose to stand up for when no one is watching at all. I vanished into the industrial veins of the city before the soldiers arrived, not because I feared them, but because I had already seen how this world treated anything it could not own. And beneath abandoned rail lines and rusted factories, I listened as the narrative shifted above me. Emergency broadcasts framing the battle as an unfortunate misunderstanding, analysts debating whether I was a foreign weapon or a terrorist symbol, and Homelander's absence explained away with rehearsed concern, and the speed at which truth was buried disturbed me more than his violence ever had. I followed the data trails quietly, tracing Vought's reach like a spreading infection, learning how their heroes were insured, marketed, forgiven, and protected by systems designed to survive scandal. And the deeper I went, the clearer it became that Homelander was not an anomaly but a flagship, the most visible expression of a culture that rewarded dominance and punished restraint. It was there, in the sublevels of a shuttered distribution hub, that I encountered the others, not gods, not celebrities, but fractured humans moving with caution and purpose, their eyes sharp with suspicion rather than awe. And when they raised their weapons at me, I lowered mine first, because I recognized that look, the look of those who had learned that survival required distrust. They called themselves the Boys, and as we spoke carefully, quietly learned of blackmail and leverage, of quiet wars fought in alleyways and courtrooms, of loved ones crushed by collateral damage and covered up with smiles. And though they did not trust me, they understood something vital, that real change never comes from the top of a pedestal. It comes from pressure applied where no cameras are allowed. I offered them no grand alliance, no speeches about destiny, only my help, conditional and limited, because I had learned that imposing salvation is just another form of tyranny. And when they asked why I would risk myself for a world that had already chosen its monsters, I answered honestly that protecting freedom does not require belief in gratitude, only belief that injustice unopposed becomes tradition. Above us, Homelander raged in private. I could feel it in the spikes of activity, the sudden disappearances, the tightening of security, and I knew he would return stronger, angrier, more desperate to reassert his myth. And as I prepared for that inevitability, I felt the familiar weight of command settle over me. Not the authority of rank, but the burden of choice, because every action I took here would ripple outward through fragile lives already living under the shadow of false gods. This world did not need another symbol, it needed resistance that refused to become spectacle. And, as I stood in the dim light of flickering fluorescence, scarred but unbroken, I understood that my greatest battle would not be against Homelander's strength, but against a system that taught people to cheer while being crushed. The more time I spent operating in the margins of this world, the more I understood that its greatest weapon was not strength but inevitability. The way cruelty had been normalized until resistance felt naive, and as I worked alongside the Boys' quiet extractions, intercepted transfers of Compound V data siphoned from servers. Buried beneath legal obfuscation, I began to see how deeply fear had been engineered into the public psyche, because people will tolerate almost anything if they are convinced there is no alternative. Homelander felt that shift before it reached the headlines, his presence looming heavier in the city like a storm that refused to break. And when he finally confronted me again, it was not in the open but in a deserted coastal facility, waves crashing against concrete pylons, as if the ocean itself sensed what was coming. And he did not smile, this time his voice raw, as he demanded to know why people were starting to question him, why approval ratings dipped, why the silence around him felt different. And I realized then that what terrified him most was not losing control, but losing love. He attacked with everything he had, not holding back, every blow fueled by desperation rather than confidence, and the battle tore the facility apart, steel screaming, water flooding in. And as we fought, I spoke to him, not to provoke but to anchor, telling him that admiration built on fear is not love, that he had been robbed of choice long before he ever took his first breath. And for a fraction of a second his attacks faltered, grief flashing across his face like a glitch in corrupted code. But systems built on lies do not collapse gently. He screamed and drove me through the structure into the sea, the cold pressure crushing around us. And as we sank, I locked my grip around him, not to drown him but to keep him from fleeing, to force him to confront something he had never faced before. a consequence that could not be spun, edited, or erased. When we finally surfaced, waves burning with reflected firelight, he tore free and fled, not victorious, not defeated, but exposed. And as I watched him disappear into the clouds, I knew this war would not end with his fall, because symbols rarely die quietly. I returned to shore, battered and corroded, salt water hissing against damaged plating, and the boys waited there in silence, understanding without words that tonight was not about winning, but about proving that gods could bleed. And as dawn crept over the horizon, I felt something I had not allowed myself in a long time, not hope, but resolve. Steadier and heavier, because this world was beginning to remember that power can be challenged and that memory is the most dangerous thing of all. By the time the world noticed something had changed, it was already too late to put the illusion back together the way it had been, because faith, once cracked, does not return to its original shape. And as investigations spread and footage leaked in pieces Vought could not fully contain, I remained in the shadows, not as a general or a king, but as a constant pressure against systems that thrived on silence, dismantling quietly, methodically, never allowing myself to become the spectacle they wanted me to be. Homelander still flew, still smiled for cameras, still spoke the language of patriotism and protection, but beneath it all his certainty was gone, his violence sharper and more erratic, his myth bleeding out through the cracks no amount of branding could seal. And I watched him from afar with a sorrow that felt heavier than hatred, because he was not the root of this world's sickness, only its most visible symptom. The boys continued their war in the open, names spoken now without whispers, and people began to ask questions, not because they were brave, but because doubt had finally been given permission to exist, and that was enough. I did not stay to rule or rebuild, because that has never been my way. Heroes who remain too long become monuments, and monuments invite worship or destruction in equal measure. And as I prepared to move on, repairing myself beneath an open sky far from cities and cameras, I reflected on the lesson this universe had carved into my spark, that freedom is fragile not because it is weak, but because it demands responsibility from those who claim to protect it. When the time came, I left without ceremony, a silent guardian fading into myth, not because this world no longer needed me, but because it had begun at last to need itself, and somewhere far behind me. Homelander screamed at a mirror that refused to love him back, while a child turned off a screen and asked a parent what a real hero was supposed to look like. I transformed and drove into the horizon as the sun rose, metal humming softly, carrying with me the quiet hope that even in a world built on lies, truth can still arrive unannounced, stand its ground, and leave behind something stronger than fear.